So, last time I spoke about basically how conservatives in general, this was an extension, of course, of the video I had on Jordan Peterson. And so I got inspired by that to make a video explaining why conservatives actually oppose what makes Western culture so unique and what makes it better than other cultures. And so what I said is that actually Western culture is better not because it's just another culture, but rather precisely because it's not a culture like any other. Um, Basically, what makes Western culture better is that Western culture fundamentally is about doing things rationally as opposed to just following tradition. This makes it just something fundamentally different. It's qualitatively different, and it's much better. Like I say, it's like an incipient attempt to make a stage two society, which is when people actually just do things rationally instead of according to custom and instinct. And so obviously, this implies that I'm opposed to all these sort of irrational customs and norms and rules and beliefs. And so here I figured out I'd discuss why I'm opposed to religion. And I really am opposed to religion in general, fundamentally, for the very reason of what religion constitutes. So basically, religion is about belief in something that you don't know. See, so it's perfect. It fits perfectly with stage one ideology in general, because it's just you believe in things for no good reason. You believe in it just because other people around you believe in it. Um, See, religion is about giving people a set of, yeah, it's a set of beliefs, a set of rules, and it gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. And it gives cohesion to society. So, I mean, it's very useful in the context of stage one societies fighting against one another and just with people who are just too irrational to be able to actually do things logically. So it's useful when you've got just a bunch of irrational people who belong to society which is in competition with another society, like all stage one beliefs generally. Um, Now, the thing is, before I get too critical about religion, I want to say that so firstly, there's obviously no evidence for any religion. I mean, why would there be so many different religions? If there was evidence that religion was true, you would expect that all the religions would be the same, right? Because just like science, there's not like a bunch of different sciences that each believe in its different ideas. No, there's science and there's pseudoscience, right? There's science and there's fake science. But in religion, it's not like that. They're just a bunch of different religions, and there's no indication that any of them is correct. But on the other hand, there is an indication that lots of supernatural phenomena do in fact occur. That's not something I'm going to cover in depth here. I'm just putting that out. I'll give you I'll give you evidence another time, okay? And I'll sort of explore what the implications are and everything. But for now, I'll just say that there is much evidence for all sorts of, supernatural, paranormal phenomena. But there is no religion that provides a compelling explanation for them. There's no religion that seems to be more, accurate or representative of the truth than any other. And by that, I'm even including, those what is sort of this movement that sort of pretends to not even really be a religion, but just a more irrational way of seeing these phenomena, and that's what I call New Age religion. But New Age religion really much is a religion actually, because it also New Age religion holds all sorts of beliefs that are contradicted by science. Anyway, so what I want to explore is maybe why these religions don't have credibility, why they're all fundamentally irrational and not really believable. So we could start so I mentioned New Age religion. So what was I thinking of specifically about New Age religion? So like in lots of these things, you've got, for instance, like so in New Age religion, you've got okay, so in religions in general, there's this idea of what happens to you, like your consciousness, your soul, or whatever, after you die, right? So there's not really any way of knowing for sure because, like, nobody's ever died and come back. I mean, you've had near-death experiences, but by definition, these people didn't actually die, so you don't really know for sure. Um, And so, for instance, well, lots of like Christianity believes that, you go to heaven or hell and that you just sort of stay there forever. And New Age religion believes that you reincarnate. And there isn't really any proof of anything either way. Although you could say that there's some, I'll talk about this another time. There is maybe some limited evidence about some things, but overall there isn't really any proof about that. On the other hand, some phenomena you can absolutely have proof of, and what I'm thinking here is, for instance, things like telepathy, right, and clairvoyance, where you know what somebody else is thinking, or you know what is happening somewhere else, and then it's corroborated because you actually like see it, and you hear about it. Like somebody says, "Oh, I was thinking that," and it's like so exactly, precisely corresponding to what you yourself, to what you visualized in your mind through the sixth sense, that you know that it can't have just been a coincidence. You know that it had to have been something supernatural. So I mean, I've never had those examples happen to me. I've had a few other weird supernatural things happen, as have many people. And so it's not like I don't have like psychic powers or anything. So what I've had is actually, the so-called law of attraction thing, where you sort of like say, affirmations, or basically like it's like a prayer, and then it actually happens. And so you could also just also say, imagine a prayer, and it also have it happen. And basically, it has worked. Again, you can't know for sure if it was because of that, but it was statistically pretty unlikely for it to have happened otherwise. So I think that's, it's like, you never know for sure, but it's evidence in favor of something like that happening. Um, and also, what I had was omens, where you have these sort of things that happen, like a synchronicity, what they call synchronicity, where, you happen to be at the same place as you see like some sort of animal or something, and you really feel that it means something, and then somehow something else happens later that tells you that it really was an omen because that thing symbolizes something that was supposed to happen. Again, I'll talk about that later, go in detail, because there's lots to talk about here. But so what I want to say is that there's lots of evidence for all sorts of supernatural phenomena, but the religions don't provide an explanation which I consider satisfactory. And in large part, that's precisely for one, because they all have their ideas of like different sort of afterlife realms that we can't really know about for sure. And also they have ideas of all sorts of beings that inhabit these realms, and we can't know about them either, and there isn't really any evidence for any specific beings. So okay, you've got all these sort of non-denominational people who go like astral traveling, and so they report seeing all sorts of, wonderful, amazing, sort of weird worlds and whatever, and all sorts of, beings that populate them. But the thing is that each astral traveler has like a different account. So as far as I can tell, it's just like a dream where everybody dreams, but everybody reports a different dream. And likewise, astral traveling is the same. It seems like everybody just sees something completely different. And likewise, in near-death experiences, which seems to me just like a form of this astral traveling thing, where you sort of have these experiences, but everybody just sees something completely different. And of course, like like in a near-death experience, a Christian will see something that sort of confirms his Christian belief, and somebody who believes like in Buddhism will see something that confirms his Buddhist beliefs. And so as far as I can tell, it still doesn't provide anything compelling. All that you see is that people just have these very intense hallucinatory experiences, but they don't actually seem to represent anything real. There's no consistency like we have here in the real world. And so that's why I want to say that A, there is evidence for supernatural phenomena, but B, there isn't any evidence for all the sort of cosmology of religions that involves all these sort of distant worlds and beings, and sort of, yeah, like heaven and hell and demons and gods and all these things. There isn't any evidence that any of them are true. People are visualizing these things, yes, like they are in dreams, but they aren't, because everybody's seeing something different. it doesn't seem like any of these things are really all that true. So that, for me, is the main reason why there isn't any religion that I find particularly convincing in any way. And so what I want you to see is that I'm not just dismissing the idea offhand like lots of these, so-called skeptic people are. They'll just, completely reject any such notion of supernatural phenomena. And, what's ironic is that these people think they're being rational. And actually that's not rational, because to be rational is to believe in empiricism and to just look at the data and see, well, does the data indicate that it's like this or does it not? And to me, the data clearly indicates that supernatural phenomena do exist. Although, I mean, yeah, no, they're like clearly I would be extremely. It seems extremely unlikely at this point, considering. So sure, it's anecdotal. It's anecdotal data. It's accounts of people that have experienced these things, but including me, and just combined all this mass of anecdote. People say plural of anecdote doesn't amount to data, but that's crap. Of course it does. Anecdote is data. Anecdote is data. Absolutely. And especially when you just have thousands and thousands of people that are reporting all sorts of things like this. So basically, there is evidence for this, but there's not evidence for religion. And so religion for me is like a way of conceptualizing these phenomena, and more generally just having a big, cosmology of all of existence, and it's a way of doing so, but in an irrational way. I mean, it's not based on any evidence. It's just people that just sort of fantasize. It's just like a little kid imagining some sort of story, and for which there's not really any evidence at all, and people then just end up believing it because everybody else around them believes in it. So let's maybe have a look at more specifically why like certain religions aren't credible. So New Age religion, well, New Age religion has this belief in the so-called root races, which, well, already is a rather racist concept, but of course, that doesn't really put into question the truth or, the reality of whether these concepts are true or not. But and so these root races are supposed to be, ancestors of our current humans, but that existed over hundreds of millions of years of Earth history. So instead of, modern-ish humans appearing, in the past few million years, the past like 2-3 million years, it would have been more like over the past like 300 million years or something. I don't even remember how long it was supposed to be, but it's something like that. It's something like 100 times more than what it was. And not just that, but instead of just having been like, like nomadic hunter-gatherer people for most of that time, that, just for most of those few million years, instead it was supposed to be that humans were already super civilized and technologically advanced for hundreds of millions of years. And there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever in the geological record for that to have been the case. And likewise, they have this idea that each, because these root races are numbered, and like we're at number 5, so they're like 4 before. And like each race had a world where the continental configuration was completely different, but not in, the way that happened through plate tectonics, but rather that you had these continents that would suddenly become catastrophically, very rapidly submerged, and others taking their place, just rising up from the seafloor where there's nothing before. And that, again, just utterly contradicts the geological evidence. There's just no evidence at all whatsoever for that. And for me, that just shows that is complete crap. And yet that's a major tenet of New Age religion, and which is why I want you to understand that New Age religion is complete crap, okay? It's complete crap. And now, supposedly, this information was like channeled, right? People just, you had these guys doing this sort of, like that guy called Edgar Casey, who would just like do his weird meditation, then sort of do like channel information from these superior beings or something. And this is part of the information that he channeled. And this, of course, indicates that the information that you get from channeling is crap, okay? You cannot believe channeled information, because channeled information includes stuff like this, which is utterly contradicted by actual, genuine, solid evidence from the geological record. Okay, and now let's consider Christianity. And maybe not just Christianity, but the whole, what I call Yahwehism, right? Because that's Judaism and Christianity and Islam, which are basically the same religion because it's all just about the same God, right? It's just one God, which is Yahweh. And so Yahwehism revolves around this one sort of super powerful, magical humanoid that kind of created everything. And the idea is that this sort of magical humanoid is both all knowing, all powerful, and all good. But of course, so already that is contradictory because if that being was actually all good, it wouldn't, it wouldn't allow for like suffering. And so people, they say like, why are there natural catastrophes that kill people and stuff? And I want you to realize that kind of suffering is incredibly limited compared to the suffering that is actually, not just somewhat incidental like that, but actually utterly planned and just directly, directly inflicted through the concept of hell, right? Hell is an absolutely horrendous thing, right? Because basically you just have this tiny little short life existence, which is, utterly deterministic. In any case, this idea of free will is invented by religious people to justify the existence of hell, right? Because if there wasn't free will, then everything you did would already have been predetermined, and then it would be God's fault that you would be sent to hell. And of course, that is what Calvinists believe in, and which is absolutely nuts. They actually basically believe that the God actually knew in advance who would be going to hell and who didn't, which means that God actually just created someone to be bad, and so that would go to hell. So that God just might as well have directly sent that person to hell. So that is really evil, right? That's God just sent someone to hell for no good reason other than that God just decided to do so. And meanwhile, even a person who doesn't believe in predestination, even a person who does believe in free will, well, it's still not really, it still doesn't make sense, because how could God be omniscient if God didn't know the future? I mean, God is supposed to not, I imagine for me that omniscience means that God knows everything that will happen. And if God knows everything that will happen, God also knows when before knew, and when God created things and when God created people, he knew what they were going to do, and so he knew that they're going to do evil things. And so it makes no sense to create something that you know is going to do something evil and to then send it to hell. I mean, it's your fault. You made these things that way to do evil things, so you'll send them to hell. So Jews don't have hell, and initial Christianity didn't, and that concept got sort of added slightly later. But any person who believes in this God that is supposedly good but actually sends people to hell for reasons that actually the God itself made them do is nonsensical. I mean, it means that they believe in a being of infinite evil, since hell is like infinite suffering. So, like, how can you believe that that is good? And, like, people get all outraged about, like, the Nazis, that they killed, like, all these millions of Jews and stuff. But, in comparison to what this Yahweh supposedly did and is doing and will do, that's nothing. Like, Nazis are just, like, incredibly great people in comparison. Because, like, no matter what kind of terrible things they did, it is always zero compared to infinity, right? Like, anything finite is always infinitely smaller than infinity. And of course, that's why I actually don't believe that infinity can exist, because it just statistically doesn't make sense. But that's something I'll cover in another topic. But infinity is not possible. But in these Yahweh's religion, they do believe in infinity, and so that makes no sense, right? They believe in infinity, and they believe in infinite suffering, and they actually think it's somehow good. Like, they actually worship a being that is responsible for infinite suffering, which for me is just the most horrible thing imaginable. So they actually worship a being which is infinitely evil, and which is thus infinitely worse than anything else, and yet they worship this thing. And that is why I say that you simply cannot be moral if you worship a God which has created hell and sends beings into hell. It simply, you cannot, because it means that you literally worship evil. Okay, that is the fundamental thing. So Jews don't, by and large, don't believe in that. So Jews can already be let off the hook to a much greater extent than modern Christians and Muslims who believe in hell, because and also those who don't believe in hell from those religions, because I mean, in comparison, all of the other bad things that Yahweh does in the Bible, like people say the Ancient Testament God is more evil. But it's not true, because the New, I mean, no, it's true. The New Testament God doesn't actually necessarily talk about hell either. There's crying and gnashing of teeth, but that then got interpreted to like mean hell. But there isn't, and there's like the lake of fire, but the idea is that then you just get annihilated from the lake of fire. So there isn't, the New Testament doesn't actually feature hell. The Old Testament doesn't either. And meanwhile, the Old Testament God does do some like pretty shitty things to people and just sort of massacres various people. So he's obviously, see, the Old Testament God is just like some sort of pretty bad, tyrant that would have been pretty commonplace at the time. And the New Testament God basically is the same, actually, because like he does still send like these, this idea that the New Testament God is like better because he's a God of love and stuff, but that's crap. He also does the same at the end. The bad people get punished, and so it's all the same crap. But there wasn't hell. And so what I want you to see is that all these bad things of the supposedly violent New Testament God are still infinitely better than hell, which is why I think hell is a particularly horrible idea. I mean, if it exists, already it's horrible. And secondly, any being that was responsible for the creation of such a thing should be absolutely loathed, and we basically should try to destroy it if it was at all possible to do so. And so that's why what I want you to realize is that a person who believes, especially who believes in hell, cannot be moral, cannot do good things, because they actually literally believe in the most evil thing imaginable. So anything else that they do right is simply incidental. Like, they don't really understand why they're doing things the way they are. See, for me, ethics is consequentialism. Like, for me, good and evil is about whether something can be, to me, good and evil is basically, I think on my next post I'll make a deeper post on consequentialism. But basically, for me, good is simply about maximizing well-being and minimizing suffering. That is good and for everyone, right? So for all the sum of conscious beings, you maximize well-being and you minimize suffering. That is good. And so if you don't have that as your axiomatic principle, you can be led to believe in anything, including the very opposite of that, including just the most utter evil imaginable. And that is what these people who believe and worship a god who has created hell exactly do. And which is why any such person who actually does something good is not actually a good person. It's just somebody who sort of by chance ended up doing some good things, but that person doesn't understand why those things are good and why other things are bad. And now, meanwhile, so what I want to think, okay, so let's consider, for instance, the God, the Yahweh of the Jews, which doesn't have hell. Well, that God is still that Old Testament God that does some pretty fickle and shitty things, just like killing people because he gets slightly offended. So again, it's still not a being worthy of being worshipped, which is why, again, you can't be rational if you're a Jew. And although you're still going to be a bit more so than if you're a Muslim. And then again, of course, if you believe in like this whole Genesis story literally, and like the whole like Noah's Ark thing literally, like that again means you're not rational, and because there's no geological evidence for it. And so if you're not rational, again, you can't be good. Like, you can only be good or evil if you're rational, because it means that you have an understanding of what good and evil is. So if until you're rational, you're like an animal, and you just do things without understanding why, and you don't actually understand like that some things are good and that some things are bad. And now, if we consider like these Eastern, typical Eastern religions that originated from India, like Hinduism and Buddhism, as well as like Jainism and Sikhism and stuff. So there, the idea is that there's a bunch of gods, right? So like these are really polytheistic religions, where there's loads of different gods and like loads of different like realms of sort of various heavens and hells and stuff. And there, of course, there's also this idea that you have reincarnation as opposed to just one life and then an afterlife, right? And so to me, you can be somewhat more rational for believing in that. Why? Well, because like in Yahwehism, there's this one god that's obviously a really bad person, and that you're supposed to worship this god. So that doesn't make sense, right? But meanwhile, in these other, like Hinduism, Buddhism, there's a bunch of gods who often do like bad things, but it's kind of more admitted, that they do bad things and that like they're not necessarily such great creatures. Um, so I feel that that already makes more sense. It's more like also like the ancient like Greek religions or the ancient Egyptian religions where you know that there's some bad gods, and so you recognize that they're all not all that great necessarily, and to a certain extent, even if you worship them, it's not even necessarily because they're good, but because you just want to be on their good side. There's more people admit more that it's you know that it's just out of self-interest to kind of to flatter them and to have them on your side. And so supposedly there's this idea that, I've seen lots of these people have this idea that there's a progression that you start out with polytheism and then you move on to monotheism, and that's somehow a progression of religion and, ideology somehow. And I actually don't really agree with that, because it's actually, I consider it more rational. I consider those other religions more rational because precisely there isn't this notion that this one evil god is somehow good. Like in these polytheistic religions, there's always this idea that these gods aren't actually all that great, and that to me is a lot more rational, because that actually is. I mean, they are portrayed as being not that great, and then that is admitted. Whereas Yahweh is portrayed as being terrible, but none of that is admitted, and they pretend that Yahweh is great. And like in these like Hinduism and Buddhism, there's this concept of karma. But karma, it's about like if you do something bad, then you'll get punished. You do something good, you'll get rewarded. But it's actually not considered all that good. These religions actually think that karma is actually an unfortunate thing. Unlike the Yahwehist religions, where that it's really like the God wanted it that way and everything, there it's an impersonal force, which is actually pretty tyrannical, and which you're actually supposed to liberate yourself from through the concept of moksha, which is which is also bodhi, which is enlightenment. Um, it's liberation, and you're supposed to liberate yourself from the influence of karma. And that's what it's really about. That's what this enlightenment thing is really about. And so, interestingly, there's it's a much more pragmatic approach. They have this cosmology. They say, okay, you have all these gods and heavens and stuff, but they aren't necessarily all that good, and you actually have to kind of try to free yourself from them. So I far prefer that attitude. I find it a lot more rational. It's not just blindly worshiping everything that you have in your cosmology, even if it doesn't make sense. So yeah, I think they have a much more rational approach to things. But still, Hinduism and Buddhism and the other things, they still aren't rational, simply because, well, we've got no evidence for these gods. Like, why those gods and not the gods of any other religion? Because like there's a bunch of religions. I mean, I spoke about those ones because they're major religions, but then you've got all these little tribes that each have their own little weird religion, and they all have different gods and other things like that. And there's no evidence in favor of one particular god being real, or one particular set of gods being real and all the others not. And of course, if any religion is true, I mean, it means that the other ones are false. And I mean, to me, it just seems silly. Like, why would you think that of all the religions, yours in particular would be the one that actually happens to be true? And so, again, it means if you believe in any of those religions, it means that you're irrational and that you're just very influenced by you're very conformist. You're influenced by people around you. You're basically you're a sheep, a sheeple, as they say. Um, If people actually just believed in whatever religion based on what they thought was the most convincing from a purely sort of rational perspective, well, you'd expect that there'd be equal proportions of each religion in every place. Like, instead of having, a country which is almost entirely Muslim, and then a country which is almost entirely Christian, another country which is almost entirely Hindu, you would have equal, proportions. You'd have like 10% of Muslims and 10% of Christians and 10% of Hindu in each country, and other percentages of other religions in each country, just based on the fact that certain people found certain religions more compelling based on the evidence that they presented, and other people found other religions more compelling based on that evidence. So the very fact that religions are very much have differing proportions of adherents depending on the region of the world implies that religion is all about conformism and just irrational societal belief rather than anything logical, right? It's just incontrovertible, that just the way it is. Religion is obviously nonsense. It's just that's it. There's nothing more to it than that. It's just obviously nonsense. And so what I want to say is that if you believe in a religion, it means that you're irrational. And again, if you are irrational, you cannot be a good person. Because to be a good person, again, you have to be rational to be able to determine what is good and what is evil. That's just necessary. That is necessary. And I've been noticing that there's been like some polls conducted, especially like on Americans, which ask, do you believe if you can be moral and not religious? Like, there's this poll asking people, do you think that non-religious people can be moral? And apparently lots of people actually, so I think it's a funny wording because I actually believe the opposite. And so, but here there's the wording that you ask, can non-religious people be moral? And lots of people say no, like a non-religious person cannot be moral. And that is just so ironic because it's like literally the very opposite of the truth. In fact, you can only be moral if you're not religious, and you cannot be moral if you are religious. So that is why we have to fight religion. Like, that was Marx, Marx got lots of things wrong. I'm sort of wary about talking about Marx because like everybody, all these sort of anti-communist people just hear Marx, and anybody who quotes Marx is then a Marxist and just evil and stuff. And like, no, I fundamentally I disagree with well, I disagree and I agree with him. It depends on what exactly. He had a vision, which was a very vague vision of some kind of distant utopia, which was communism, which was basically just meant to mean a life of leisure enabled by the progress of technology and automatization, which led to a society which just produced goods abundantly without requiring anybody to actually do it. It would just be all machines doing it. And I think that's a really nice vision. And I think that is indeed how things should progress. That is the future for me, or that's at least the future if the future is good. But of course, that wasn't going to be possible for a long time. And so in the meanwhile, he had this idea that what was needed until that would be achievable from a technological standpoint, his idea was that you needed to have the workers in control of the means of production, and that was socialism. And the problem is that actually doesn't work really well. Like, now some will say that, okay, so like socialism never was even really tried because it was always just state capitalism. But like, the thing is, again, this is not really the topic of the discussion here, but basically it still doesn't work. I mean, there's a reason why all these supposedly socialist, societies ended up becoming state capitalists instead. And that is that it's not stable, and it doesn't work because the workers are just going to be rewarding themselves for their own work. Like I explained on the post on Jordan Peterson, workers just reward their own work, which means that they can also reward themselves for not working, which will mean that eventually your economic system is just going to collapse, and people very quickly are going to see that, and you're just going to revert to capitalism, because obviously otherwise nothing works. And in any case, workers also are going to have to trade each other on the free market. There's just a lot of reasons. I'll make another post on this specifically, because takes a little while to explain it properly. But basically, it's just not a stable system. So Marx, he had a nice utopian futuristic vision, but then he thought that to reach that you needed socialism, and actually that's a mistake. Socialism is a mistake. And so what I'm saying, though, is that Marx did, he did make some very good and valid criticism of liberal capitalism, and more generally also traditional societies. And so one of the things that he said was that religion is a bad thing. So he called it this opium of the people, which was the idea that basically it makes people accept that life is bad. It makes them kind of more docile in a way. They accept their material conditions because they have this reward that's being dangled in front of them, that they're going to be going to heaven. And of course that's crap, right? And it's true. And so he's right about that. He's right that in part that is what religion is about. That is, in fact, largely what religion is about. And that is why we should fight religion, in part. Partly because of that, and partly just because, again, it's irrational. So, Marx said that we should get rid of religion, absolutely, and I agree with that. We have to get rid of religion, precisely because of this opium of the people aspect, where, it makes people less interested in making real material changes in the world. Religious people often are reluctant to implement social change that would help poor people, because it goes against their traditions and stuff, and they think that, oh well, anyway, you have the afterlife, and so it's it's okay, and even you're meant to suffer on earth because it's a test and whatnot, and so obviously that's silly, and that makes people actually maybe value suffering, and makes them actually support policies that give rise to suffering. And then, of course, there's the aspect that religion inherently is irrational, which means that if you believe in religion, you're irrational, which means that then when it comes to making policy decisions, you're also going to make irrational decisions, and thus you're going to make the wrong decisions. Which means that you can't really have a properly functional democracy as long as most people believe in religion. And so that is why we must get rid of religion. But obviously, we have to do that in a way that's not too bad. We shouldn't persecute people for religion. And so why is that? Is simply, it's not so much even out of religious freedom or respect of religion. Again, I don't believe in that. We should not respect religions. What we should respect, rather, is people's right to freedom, is people's right to do whatever they want, as long as it doesn't really directly harm somebody in a severe way. You can't be free to just shoot people, because that directly harms people. You can't be free to pour arsenic in a river, because that directly harms people, okay? But on the other hand, it's not quite so obvious how, just making prayers to some imaginary being directly harms people, you see. It does harm people, but indirectly through irrationality. But as you can see, it doesn't have quite such a direct causality. It doesn't cause harm per se. And that is why I'm actually reluctant to fight religion directly. That's why I'm reluctant to make religion illegal. That's why I don't recommend that we should actually shut all churches down. That would go against the principle of individual freedom. But of course, in theory, if that was actually what was required to get rid of religion, and then we would know that religion was eliminated permanently, well, I actually would support it, just because of the harm that stems from religion. But even then, I'm not sure, because even if we did that, people would still probably be irrational, right? They'd just be irrational in other ways. It's just say China, they're largely atheist, but they're still irrational. They believe in their other irrational stuff instead, including like some sort of traditional, vaguely religious beliefs, and also just like their nationalism and their, just their innate sort of typical cultural beliefs and stuff. So, just because you're atheist doesn't make you rational. Um, yeah, this is why I don't think that religious, elimination actually makes sense. And so we shouldn't do that. We should be very clear that we should allow people to be free to practice their religion. But obviously, that does not mean that people should be free to impose their religion on other people, including their own family members. And that's one thing that the left just completely gets wrong nowadays. And leftists nowadays are like anti-leftists. Like literally, leftists nowadays are like, in many ways, they're like ultra-conservative right-wingers. Precisely because they support multiculturalism, which is a terrible thing. And so for some instance, they support communities being able to force like members of their communities to believe in their religion and to be subjected to the laws of their religion. And that is a terrible thing. And that's a terrible thing not only within Western countries, but even within other countries. Again, if you believe in equality, you should believe in equality for everyone at a global scale, which means that you should not be able to believe that anywhere one should be allowed to impose religion on other people. If it's wrong if it's wrong in the US, if it's wrong in the UK, it's also wrong in Egypt or in India. Okay, so we really have to fight religion on a global scale because people are suffering from it enormously. Like nowadays, like you still have women that are being killed literally because they had sex out of wedlock. I mean, that's nuts, right? It's nuts. How can left-wingers support that? And of course, no, they say, oh, we don't support that. But it's like, okay, when it just becomes a bit too bad, then like suddenly, oh, we're not good. That's bad. Like, please don't stone the women because that's not nice. But like anything short of that, they're like, oh, well, that's wonderful that you're able to express your shitty cultural beliefs. Oh, we support you absolutely to, like force a woman to stay huddled in her little burqa, and we absolutely support that you have 4 wives and that, you leave the other men to be in cells, and we absolutely support that you go around like slut-shaming women, and we absolutely think it's wonderful that, you're not being oppressed by the poor Western imperialists that want to impose their horrible rationality onto you. So, they're terrible, okay? These leftists are not at all supporting what Marx wanted, okay? It's like opposite. They're opposite. They're supporting like medieval stuff, okay? This is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. And of course, the jobism too. Marx wanted a society which wouldn't have anybody working. Instead, now it's like, oh, let's work, and we have to work, and then work is wonderful. And like, no, that is not how things should be. And like, even if Marx did support that, well, it would be wrong, So I like, Marx to me is not a reference. Like, if Marx said everything wrong, well, then it would be wrong, and I'd recognize it as being wrong. And for me, the reference is rationality. And as far as I can tell, I'm the most rational person I've ever met, or at least certainly I've come up with the most, cohesive and rational ideology of anyone I've ever met. And so, like, I am the reference. I consider myself to be the reference. And if I talk about other people, it's just to sort of, to pad my argument out a bit. But fundamentally, I don't care if somebody said something or not. The fact that somebody said something that supports or opposes my belief is completely irrelevant. I just believe in the stuff that's rational. So yeah, so we have to get rid of religion, but not in a coercive way, not through persecution. And so how do we do that? We just have to, as much as possible, just try to foster collectively, try to foster a sort of general environment that frowns upon religion, but at the same time values individual freedom, including the freedom of people to, to engage in religious practices. But we still have to understand that this should be condemned. It should be viewed as something wrong. So in that sense, we should, like traditional societies engaged in like, maybe like if you don't stone women, but like more recently, you would, you wouldn't actually punish them legally, but you'd still like shame them, right? You shame women for having sex out of wedlock. So that's what you call slut shaming, or what I call women who have sex with multiple people shaming. And so what I recommend instead is that we do the same for religion. We do religion shaming, and that is what we need to do. But at the same time, we shouldn't do it too overtly because people then feel like persecuted, and it's hard to know the balance because sometimes they might like react and they might become further entrenched in their belief. I think it depends on critical mass. Like the more people engage in religion shaming, the less people are going to want to do religion at all. See, if you've got like 50% of the population that believes in religion, 50 that engages in religion shaming, that's going to like create polarization. It's going to further entrench the people who believe in religion, right? But if you've got like 5% of people who believe in religion and 95 who don't and who engage in religion shaming, then suddenly they're they're not going to want to stick to religion anymore because they're just going to be too marginalized mostly, and they're just going to be like, okay, screw this, we're not doing this anymore because we're just being shamed, and like, well, what's the point? We're outnumbered. And so basically, and per se, I don't think that religion shaming is a bad thing. I think we should engage in religion shaming because religion really is bad. But again, we should do it with, in a way that's altruistic, in a way that's omnibenevolent. I mean, we shame the practice of engaging in religion. We don't shame the people so much themselves. I mean, we make it clear that they should stop doing that, but that once they've stopped, well, we're not going to punish them. We're not going to make fun of them anymore for having believed in religion. We're just going to be like, okay, so you did something silly and now you stopped, and that's fine. Okay, so it should be just something that's frowned upon. Religion should be seen as something unhealthy and irrational because it is, but it shouldn't be persecuted, right? So that's my plan. So there's not really anything more to it. We just need people to agree with this, and so we just need to kind of like spread this kind of idea around until it becomes widespread enough that it actually works. That's the plan. And so that pretty much sums up what I had to say here. Bye.